Welcome to the Talent Equation Podcast. If you are passionate about helping young people to unleash their potential and want to find ways to do that better, then you've come to the right place. The Talent Equation Podcast seeks to answer the important questions facing parents, coaches, and talent developers as they try to help young people become the best they can be. This is a series of unscripted, unpolished conversations between people at the razor's edge of the talent community who are prepared to share their knowledge, experiences, and challenges in an effort to help others get better faster. Listen, reflect, and don't forget to join the discussion at thetalentequation.co.uk. Enjoy the show.
Well, I'm really excited to be able to welcome Amy Price to the Talent Equation. Amy, welcome.
Thank you very much, Stu.
It's great to have you on. There's a number of reasons I'm really excited to have you on. One is because all of your research and all of the stuff that you do is really close to my heart in terms of what I'm trying to do with my coaching. And having listened to you recently on Jack Walton's podcast and been just blown away by it, it's made me realize quite how much I've still got to do to be able to become I'm going to describe you as a kind of games-based coaching black belt based on the conversation we had. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that and really drill into it because I've got loads of questions. The reason I'm really excited is because I'm also really shamefaced in the sense that you're only the second female coach I've had on the Talent Equation podcast, which given what I do for a living and a lot of the stuff I talk about around diversity and more women in coaching, I think is a particularly bad thing. So it's something I'm aiming to address. And there hasn't been any reason for that. It just so happens there's just been lots of blokes who've been able to talk to me on the podcast. But anyway, I'm going to definitely make an address to that. Anyway, less about that and more about you. Tell me all about yourself and your story and how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
Okay, so obviously love football. Started playing football at a young age with my brothers at school, in the playground, and that kind of developed into a passion for really all sports, I suppose. So through school and stuff like that, where probably my PE teachers got me interested in coaching, and that was where my starting point was. So I remember when I was 17, I was very desperate to get a job, and the only job after sending about 25 CVs out to the local shops was a job in a shoe shop for like £3.85 an hour. And I hated it so much. It wasn't even because of the money I hated it. It was mainly just because I hated the job. And that just basically inspired me to just try and start doing something that I love on a Saturday morning as opposed to something I hate. So that's when I got qualified as an FA Level 1 coach. And straight away just contacted Fulham, who are my local team, and started working in their community. At that time, it was sort of just after school clubs, Saturday morning clubs, and developed like a really big passion for delivering sessions for kids and seeing how they get on with learning new stuff. And for myself as well, just like practicing the art of coaching, I suppose. And then that evolved into me taking it a little bit more seriously and becoming full-time at Fulham as like a trainee, like a youth trainee person, where I had to like dabble with everything associated to the foundation. So I was doing a bit of disability stuff, a bit of social inclusion stuff, after school clubs, holiday camps, and a little bit of coaching in America in between that, just the kind of the camps, I suppose, that a lot of coaches have been involved with. And just kind of developed a love for it, to be honest. I just said yes to every single coaching opportunity that I could. And then I ended up going to university because I kind of came to a little bit of a dead end with the coaching, because I didn't know how I could make all of this sessional work into like a real job into something that was like permanent and full-time. So I opted to go to university, but I wanted to stay at home because I really loved my coaching role at that time. I was 21 and I was coaching Fulham's Centre of Excellence, the girls' Centre of Excellence, under 10s. Absolutely thoroughly enjoyed that role. I didn't want to like leave and go to like a faraway university because I wanted to carry on with that. So essentially just went to university to study PE locally at St Mary's University. And it was there really where I kind of realised that there was so much more to what I did on the grass that I would never have considered before, in terms of like the why of everything that coaches do. And then it just got me on the track, I suppose, a passion for finding out more.
And so you're a Twickenham girl then, are you, or Kennington, or somewhere like that?
Yeah. So I'm actually a Croydon girl.
Okay.
And I currently live like the Kingston area, but okay. I've been obviously at university in Twickenham since 2008.
Okay.
Because after graduating, I worked at a PE school in Twickenham.
Yeah.
Taught PE in a school in Twickenham, and then went back to university as a lecturer. So kind of, St Mary's, I feel like should be tattooed somewhere on my body after 10 years of being involved with them.
Having spent 3.5 years working for the RFU and spending quite a bit of time down at Twickenham and staying overnight around there, I know the area well. So I imagine you've frequented the eel pie pub on the odd occasion.
I'm not. I probably have. Yeah, I can't remember it though.
Good, similar experiences. Right. So in terms of your coaching and sort of what took you on this path. So you obviously began. Something happened to you, didn't it? Which kind of stirred an idea around a different way of coaching. So most people I speak to on this podcast describe an epiphany or a moment or something that sort of they asked a question of themselves and it was almost like an itch they couldn't scratch, and so they went in a different direction. I think you had a similar story. Is that right?
Yes. I still to this moment can't put my finger on it really, how it came about, to be honest. I was fascinated with games. I've known that for ages, because as a kid I was always obsessed with turning everything into a game. And whatever we were doing, whether it was like sports or otherwise, it had to be some sort of competition involved or something where I could design some sort of new avenue to explore further within whatever activity we were doing. So I guess when I went to university, I kind of realised that game-based coaching was actually a thing. I didn't realise that was a term before I went to university. I just used to use games because I enjoyed them. And because I played a lot of video games when I was growing up, I guess I kind of used to relate a lot of concepts back to what I used to do. So Sonic the Hedgehog, Fast Feet, or collecting coins in Mario, or facing the baddie at the end of a level, stuff like that. And I think really the moment where I realised I was like my wow moment was when the penny dropped, when I was looking at what games are, as in the definition of a game. And I was just going online and I was just searching like different articles and stuff. And through that process, I realised I came away from like sports games. It was taking me down the avenue of games as a whole. So like it was stuff to do with gambling. It was stuff to do with board games, like dating back to like years and years ago. And at that point, I noticed somebody defined a game as just a set of problems that need to be solved. And I was like, that definition is so simple, but so applicable to any type of game that I've ever been involved in. Like Monopoly was a game that I used to play every Christmas with the family, or Happy Families is a card game that often comes out and where I live as well. So I realised, yes, it's true. Like if you're playing those games, or if you're playing football, it is just a set of problems that need to be solved. And this particular person that had said that he was actually talking about video games initially. And that's when I actually looked in further to video games and understood the design mechanics of video games, and just realised how much similarities there was in that industry, and how so far at that point I hadn't seen any connection between sports coaching industry, PE teaching industry and video games industry, despite the fact that I think we all have the same intentions. So like a video game designer wants people to carry on playing the game and to get better at it, and as does sports coaches and PE teachers.
Yeah, and a video game designer has exactly the same motivations, I suppose, as those of us who are coaches, in the sense that, well, maybe, in the sense that the more successful their game is, the more people tell each other about it, the more they want to play it, and the more copies of the game itself that they sell.
Yeah.
And so the more kind of addictive, or the more addictive is. It is addictive, isn't it? The more engaging it is, the more people are going to take. And from our perspective, that's kind of a big part of what we do as an industry, isn't it? Is we want people to be engaged, and we want them to. Although the reason I paused at the start of that was I sometimes wonder whether we've, as an industry, lost sight of that sometimes, and we became a bit fixated on improvement, and then maybe that took us away from the engagement. I'm not sure the two things are necessarily separate, but I think that might have happened at some stages.
Yeah, again, it's the same person. Is James G is the person that I keep referring to, who provided that initial definition of a game. And something else that I've come across in his work is his comments around learning and enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And traditionally, people separate those two concepts. Oh. So they associate like learning is school, and enjoyment is something you do outside of school. Mm-hmm. So if you look at that as in sports coaching, maybe in the past we as a profession might have been guilty of training sessions being classed as learning, but not always enjoyment, or the other way around. Sometimes training sessions, it's just about enjoyment and not about learning. But actually, like as James G describes, it's video games bring the two of those concepts perfectly together.
I was talking to James, not James, I was talking to Steve Hooper from Inclusion Coaching just yesterday about this, and he was saying, and I think along similar lines, is that he actually has quite a problem with some parents who don't kind of like the approach he takes, because he's a very games-based coach as well, coaching within the game, and some parents don't like it, and I think it's because we've become, I think, the coaching industry, in an attempt to make itself sort of more serious, has modelled itself a bit more like school. So look, there's learning happening. There's instruction, there's teaching, there's learning. Yeah. And when you come to game, and so to some parents, it looks frivolous. And therefore, it's like, oh, there's not really any learning happening there. I'm going to take my child elsewhere. And that just seems a bit odd. Can't quite work that out.
I completely agree. I suppose for somebody who's not a qualified coach, or maybe hasn't, watches sports but doesn't necessarily coach sports, from an outside perspective, they might expect that linear sort of tidy-looking, coach-centred approach to coaching, just to sort of as a guarantee that their kid's going to come away with new knowledge. So, on the way home, I can imagine maybe the conversation between the parent and the player about, okay, what did you learn today? And expectation of the player being able to verbalise something new that they've learned. Mm. And I just think about video games, and I'm like, you play a video game, like an adult or a child will switch on the PlayStation, and at not one point would they start the game and say, what shall I learn today? Or what shall I practice today? And then when they turn it off, they never say, oh, what did I learn after doing that? Or what did I practice? It was just the game. They just played the game. And it was so well designed that they wouldn't be able to verbalise necessarily exactly what they've learned or what they've got better at.
You've just made me think of something, actually, which it never occurred to me before. But so obviously, you know that I rant quite a lot about isolated practice, and I'm not a big fan of drills. I've been fairly outspoken about it, and lots of reasons. But it's the equivalent of if you go to a video game, right? It's the equivalent of my little boy getting his Xbox controller and practicing the moves on his Xbox controller before then loading up the game and playing it, thinking that it's going to make him better as a. That's the equivalent, isn't it?
Yes.
And when I say that, it sounds so ludicrous. Nobody would do that.
No.
Yeah, if I walked into the room and he was doing that, I go, "What are you doing?" And he'd say, "I'm getting better at my game. I'm going to play in a minute. I'm going to play Battlefront in a minute. I'm getting better at it." I'm going, "Well, just play it."
Exactly.
But in coaching, that's like everybody wants to defend this idea of isolated practice.
Well, it's interesting because in the video game like design stuff that James G talks about, he sort of breaks it down into 13 design features. And one of them is a fish tank, he describes it as.
Right.
And basically it's a feature within the game that allows the players to experience the most simplified version of a problem in the game. And I think a good example of what that would look like in a video game is on FIFA, as an example, you can opt to go into the training mode.
Right.
Where it's just like, for example, shooting at the goal or dribbling or passing or something.
Yeah.
And there's not necessarily like defenders. To be honest, I haven't played FIFA that much, so I'm sure there's people listening that are far more knowledgeable of what it actually looks like. But essentially it's a fish tank where you can go and practice stuff without the pressure necessarily and without the intense decision-making side of it all.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, personally, when I used to play FIFA when I was younger, I never chose to play in that mode. I always just wanted to go straight into the game.
Yeah.
Even if I was not very good at the game and I kept losing, I would just make the difficulty level less on the game so that I could experience some success. And I was thinking about coaching. I was thinking, so I know that you've talked a lot about drills versus games, and I know there's a lot of people with different opinions on that debate, but I haven't tried this yet, and I really want to do it in one of my sessions. I might have like the game going on, and then next to that, I might have a fish tank.
Right. And
I know that traditionally sometimes when I've seen coaches coach, they sort of say, okay, here's the game, and then we might go away and then we might practice something in isolation and come back to the game. Mm-hmm. I have seen coaches do that. I guess the whole approach that coaches use. So it isn't quite that, though, what I'm describing. I think it would be more the case of, here's the game. At any point during this game, if you feel like you want to go to the fish tank, you can. So it might be just like one player or two or a pair of players just like go over and come back again. And they can spend as long as they want in the fish tank or as little time as they want in the fish tank. Or they can just never go to the fish tank. Or they can spend the whole time in the fish tank. And it doesn't matter if it's like all of them, one of them. And just to allow them that choice around if they're in the game and they're realising, actually, I think I need to get better at receiving to turn, for example, or need to get better at using my left foot, then I can just like go over to the fish tank. Yeah. Because if they need to use their left foot or they need to be good at receiving the ball in order to be successful in the game that I've designed, then that choice to go to the fish tank might be good for them at that moment in time, potentially. Yeah,
and what I really like about that, a couple of things you just said there that I think is really interesting is, one thing is you can go to the fish tank. Your choice wasn't to go to the fish tank. It was just to reduce the difficulty level. Yeah. So what you did was you just kind of reduced the amount of chaos and variability and difficulty and reduced it down. That would probably be my approach as well. I'm a bit like that. And if I was coaching, that's what I would do as well. That said, there's nothing wrong, like you say, with having a fish tank, and I have definitely done the same thing. But one of the things you just made me reflect on is when I do a fish tank, it's kind of an informal fish tank, and it's usually, and the fundamental difference is, instead of the starting point being you're going to learn something because the likelihood is you're going to need it in this game, and now I want you to go and apply it. The difference is that the way you're proposing to do it, if I understand correctly, is there's a problem that the individual has discovered in the game that they want some extra time and space to solve, potentially with your help. Yeah. And so there's a space for them to do that before they then take it back into the chaotic environment that the game might be.
Precisely, yeah. So the game itself, when you approach something through the lens of a video game designer, it hasn't necessarily got technical and tactical tick boxes that you want the players to specifically improve on. So I guess that's a difference. So previously, when we use game-based approaches in TGFU as an example, we will say, okay, this game is designed so there's lots of variable repetition of dribbling. And we know that the players are likely to dribble lots in this game because of the way it's modified. But in the video game approach to coaching, it wouldn't have that focus, that technical and tactical focus. So when the players in the game, they might realise, okay, I can't get to the next level. The difficulty of this game isn't increasing because I just can't get past this problem.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that this problem is, the reason I can't get past this problem is it's relating to the fact that I can't strike the ball over a far enough distance, as an example. So they've realised that, and at that point it's them then realising and making that choice as to whether they want to go into that fish tank to experience that and to practice differently.
And I was just, funny enough, I was just reading an article earlier. There's a great blog called the Bold blog. It's a load of various researchers. It stands for Blog on Learning and Development, and they were talking about something similar around. It was a behavioural psychologist talking about how, from a neuroscientific perspective, children learn much better if they're learning something that's relatable to their environment. So the example they give is if you were teaching children about the Pythagoras' theorem, rather than just teaching them about the theorem, you might tell them the story of Pythagoras and the fact that he was a philosopher who believed that God was a mathematician and all these sorts of things. So it was much more resonant. So it's the narrative that then makes the resonance with the particular activity that you might be learning about. And it's the same sort of thing. The narrative or the story is the game. And the story, there's a game, inside the story where they're essentially the hero of their own story, playing the game. There's a problem that they need to solve, and they're the hero that needs to overcome or slay the dragon, and they can't slay the dragon because they haven't got the big sword that's going to slay the dragon. So they go into the fish tank to get the big sword to slay the dragon. Yeah, precisely. And what you said there about meaning is again, it's directly in video games as well. So James G would describe that as a feature called meaning as action image, which is basically, does what you're getting the people to practice have meaning to the problems that need to be solved. And I think sometimes in coaching, even in games-based coaching, it's still meaningful usually for the coach. So right.
It might be, okay, this game is being designed to get varied repetition of dribbling, because that's what you need to get better at. That's what I think you need to get better at. And there's no choice in that for the players. They will be doing dribbling. Whether they realise it or not, whether that's an implicit or explicit process, purely through the modifications in the game, they will be doing dribbling most of the time. But does dribbling is that meaningful to the player? Do they know why dribbling is important from an overall perspective?
It's interesting because even when coaches are explicit at the outset of their sessions and articulate what the session is about for the participants, which I'm not always a huge fan of, to be honest, because I think it sometimes takes away some of the discovery. And I think I've heard you talk about that as well, so I'd be interested to explore that in more detail. But yeah, in that point, the meaning is all with the coach, isn't it? This is something that we're working on today because I've decided it's important for us, as opposed to saying, here's a game, and I won't steal your thunder. I'm talking about missions, but I'm just prompting you to talk about missions. And so here's the game, and there's a problem in this game, and let's discover what the problem might be and explore ways in which we might be able to solve that problem. There's meaning immediately there that the players are actually starting to create them for themselves.
Precisely, yeah. So I'll take your explicit hint regarding yeah, so something that's again linked with the whole video game thing is, as I said to you before, you don't turn on the video game and decide what skill you're going to practice. It's all based upon what needs to be solved, what's the problems that needs to be solved. So in coaching now at the moment, I'm practicing what I would say is mission-based learning. So instead of saying to the kids at the start of the session, we're going to be practicing passing today, or even, not mentioning that and telling that to them at the end, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to say, today your mission is to unlock all members of your team in order to win the game. That's all it is. So if that was linked to a practice design, you would just see, like, we've all seen the invasion game type of practice where you've got players locked in thirds of the pitch or areas of the pitch. So as a start point, players might be locked in, but the mission is to unlock them all. And there might be a certain way of unlocking players that I've designed through my rules. And how the players unlock each other, how they actually achieve that and level up, is completely up to them. So if I've noticed that I'm playing against you and I've realised what your strengths are, maybe what my strengths are as a player, that might dictate how I achieve the mission. So if you're really fast, really good with the ball at your feet.
Let's not take it too far. Sorry, go on.
And then maybe I'm thinking, okay, well, my strengths are I'm a bit more physical than you, so I might be able to fend you off better, might be able to force you to release the ball earlier through my physicality, as an example.
Yeah.
Then actually, I'm not practicing a specific skill. That's just something, a solution that I've noticed might work in that situation in order to get my team unlocked, in order to level up. But the interesting thing is, as the game progresses, my team could have 4 out of 5 players unlocked. So we could be on level 4 and you could be on level 1 with only 1 player unlocked. So then there's another dimension of thinking involved there, where I have to not only understand our strengths and weaknesses, your strengths and weaknesses, but also the fact that we've probably got a little bit a different advantage to you at the moment. So all of those things, if players are able to notice that as they play, like you would in a video game, as you move through the game, you notice how it's slightly different. And you notice how you can take advantage of stuff.
I was listening to you talk about that game with Jack, and I couldn't quite work out in my head how it works. So how would I unlock a team member?
Okay, so I've tried before with 8-minute games. Yeah. Just uninterrupted, 8 minutes. And at the end of the 8 minutes, whoever has the most goals gets to level up. Really, really simple. I have tried it a little bit more complex before as well, where I've looked at touches on the ball as a way of accumulating points. Sort of like collecting coins, when you're Mario and you're going through and you're trying to collect those gold coins, the most that you possibly can at the end. But I guess it completely depends on the coach and what scoring system you want to implement, but it has to be something that's objective and quite clear.
And so you're playing in that context, then you're playing a game where players are constrained by an area on the pitch and they can't move out of it, and you get to level up and players get unlocked and when you say unlock, that means they now have freedom to move to other parts of the pitch. I see. Okay, got it. Right, that makes sense. Okay, that's interesting. And you can do whatever you like, I suppose, in order to influence how they unlock their teammates.
As a coach, this sort of leads me into the next part of the whole thing. So
excellent.
I spent a long time. Well, I spent many of hours trying to understand and interpret video games into football coaching, because obviously video games is virtual and physical, and football coaching is physical. So something that I've been thinking about is myself as a coach and what responsibility I have to affect and influence how they play the game. And I'm not sure how it's in rugby, but in football, it's very much, it used to be the coach had quite a lot of influence and should have a lot of influence regarding intervening or challenging, supporting or telling. Nowadays, within football, it's gone sort of the other way in terms of players have a lot more ownership to practice as they go along, and it's less affected by the coach. Nonetheless, I think coaches in general feel a responsibility to intervene. Whether that's an intervention to challenge somebody or to pose another problem or to support, or whether that's an intervention to show or tell, I still think I've noticed, and I feel that myself, coaches feel like they need to intervene. And I was thinking for ages about why. Why do we intervene? Because when you're playing the video game, the player themselves is the only person that gets to pause the game. Unless you're a kid and your mum says, or your dad said dinner's ready, and then you have to turn it off. Other than that, it's just down to you whether you want to pause the game and when you want to pause the game and why you want to pause the game.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and that happens in education as a whole as well, with school teachers possibly feeling responsible for having to observe and then having to intervene, to challenge, to support.
Have you got any? Have you come up with any ideas as to why?
Ideas as to how it
as to why we feel like we have to intervene.
I don't know why. I think it's probably a multitude of social and.
I've got a theory I'll share with you.
Go on.
So this applies to me, so therefore I obviously think it applies to everybody else in the world. But one of the reasons why I got into coaching and why I am really fascinated by coaching is I love solving problems. I like playing games. I like solving problems. And I really like helping people to solve problems, because if I can see a solution, it's been like this all my life. So I am the world's... Have you ever played the obvious game?
No.
So the obvious game, it's quite a funny game, is I've usually played it when I've been on a tour or something, and it's basically you try and get people to state the obvious, and then basically you just ridicule them for it. And I'm the worst person in the world. I'm the worst at the obvious game, because if I see something and there's an opportunity to show my knowledge to help out, help somebody out with solving a problem, I'm gonna do that, because I really like helping people, and probably the ego side of me likes to show that I'm quite clever and I've got knowledge. Right, and that's one of the reasons I'm involved. I got caught out once. I remember I was playing. We had a penalty shootout, right, and it was one of these ones where it was like a 1v1 with the keeper. This is hockey, a 1v1 with the keeper, and it was all pressureful. It was in the middle of a tournament. It was a semi-final or something like that. And I went round the keeper, scored my goal. I was dead pleased with myself, and I ran to the sideline, and somebody said, "Oh, did you just score your goal?" And I went, "Yes." And then everybody started laughing at me because I was stating the obvious. I'm just bad, right? So, and I think a lot of coaches are a bit like that. We can't stand by and watch somebody struggle. It feels mean. We've got knowledge to help, and that's what we're there for. So of course we're going to offer them a solution, because why else would it's instinct? It's built inside us, and to deny that instinct is one of the most difficult things in the world, and it's definitely been probably my biggest challenge in my whole coaching career. Standing by and watching the struggle.
The gamer's teacher, that phrase actually originated from video game design.
Okay.
It's now emerged into teaching and coaching. And it's not new. It's not a new concept. But yeah, I think what you're saying there is probably the same with me, because I feel like I should be doing it.
Yeah.
I feel like even if they are solving the problem, I then feel like, oh no, well, they're already solving it, so I have to make it harder. I feel like I should be doing something. And this is the battle I had in my head. So I knew that as a coach, I don't think it is game as teacher, because otherwise, then why have the coach? Because I know it's the process of design, and you've done your design, but you still have, I believe, a responsibility to play in supporting and helping the kids. So after this 8 minute of gameplay, I've come up with a potential solution with regards to helping, but essentially it's them deciding how they want help. Mm-hmm. So I describe it as pauses. So if I'm going to pause the game after 8 minutes, and your team come in and you're on level 2, and that team come in and they're on level 1, I'm going to offer them some support. So you can choose to cheat, you can choose to be challenged, you can choose to change the game, or you can choose to have a clue. So within those 4 methods of support, like quite a difference in terms of, like, obviously cheat is loads of support versus challenge, which is actually, I want it a little bit tricky. I want the problem to be trickier. Mm-hmm. It's like covers with a spectrum of difficulty. Yeah. But the key to it really is when they choose what they want, for them to know why they've chosen that and how it will help them to achieve the mission. Yeah. And
say them again, because I was scribbling. Cheat, challenge,
clue, or change the game.
So I've given you I've got an idea of this. I've got an idea of challenge. I've got an idea of cheat. What would be the sort of thing you might do as a clue?
For me, the clue is the traditional coaching intervention that you might usually see. So I'm going to ask a question. Okay. Or I'm going to show you something. And then the change is regarding the playing area.
That's space.
Yes. So in my head, I describe that as the game world. Okay. So in this game world, which the kids, Minecraft is a very good example of how they interact so much with the world that it becomes a world that they've designed themselves. Yeah. So what do you want to change about the playing area? And every decision that they make the idea is that it will help them to get closer to achieving the mission.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And how many, typically, how many of those 4 C's would they be allowed? Or is it limited?
To be honest, I started off with just saying, just choose whatever you fancy, and quickly realised that I'd stitched myself up because they always chose to cheat. So I went with the little kids, like 7-year-olds, and I didn't see that one coming, which was a bit silly of me. But and the next time I delivered, I went back and did something similar. I said, okay, you can only use one, like each of these things once. So, as an example, if I was coaching this evening and I designed the game we've been describing, it was their first time of playing it. At the end of the session, my team might have used cheat and challenge. Yeah. But my team's still got change and clue. So then when we come back to the next session, we'll carry on where we left off. Yeah. So I'm coming back to the next session on level 3 with clue and change still left to use.
You made me think about it's like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire with the lifelines.
Yeah.
So do you give them the ways they can cheat? So do you give them the cheat, or a bit like a game would, or can they come up with their own ways of cheating?
At the moment, I've given them the cheat. Yeah. And
otherwise they could go berserk, couldn't they?
and it's only, to be honest, logistically, with the time. So if they're playing for 8 minutes, I really don't want that period where they come in to be too long. So they do get to choose their change. Okay. Because all I say is change the playing area, and that's usually the one where they like talk about it for ages. Examples of cheats that I've used was take a player from the other team.
Yeah.
So create an underload and an overload, but they get to choose who that player is.
Yeah.
And skip a level.
Okay.
Because if you're quite desperate to get off that level 1, if like you're the only team still left on level 1, that's quite an obvious way of cheating.
Yeah.
And then for me, the challenge is natural to coaches anyway. There could be a technical, a tactical, a social challenge, a psychological, whatever it is for the team.
Yeah. I'd be tempted to give them other cheats, like, and I'm just thinking it in my head now, got my cogs whirring, like their goals are worth double.
Okay, yeah.
Or the opposition's goals are worth half.
Yep.
for that period of the game, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what I mean. There's so many possibilities for design.
Yeah.
That it's mind-boggling sometimes. If you've got the time and energy to sit down and actually go through every aspect of your game design.
You've made me think of something there, actually, because when you said earlier about the game is the teacher, and I imagine the game is only the teacher if the game is designed well enough.
Yeah.
And so from our perspective, one of the reasons I think practice design is so important is because they use the phrase practice design, you know, whatever, representative practice design, or let's call it game design, because a game being a representation of the main game. In that context, if you design the game well enough and you design the stuff around the game well enough, it can be a fantastic teacher. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the reasons I think people are very skeptical about this idea of the game is the teacher is because I do think this is happening a bit as well, is people have heard that mantra, and so the kids just play.
Yeah.
And we're going to play some small-sided games now. Off you go, and everybody sits back and relaxes, and off they go. Oh, look, they're learning. Look how much they're learning. And don't get me wrong, they are learning. But you were fortunate enough to have Len Almond as a mentor, weren't you?
Yes. Yeah.
And I spent a little bit of time, very short amount of time, with Rod Thorpe. And something that he said to me that stuck in the back of my mind forever is he said, kids playing games is better than kids doing drills. But if that's all they do, then it's not a great deal better.
Yeah.
Which is where what you're talking about resonates so powerfully for me, because you're using essentially a very well thought through framework that's clearly working in a global sense, and taking from that and saying, well, these people are brilliant at designing games and making their things really engaging and absorbing. What can we do within our sports context to make it as absorbing or as close as possible?
Yeah. That's just sparked a lot of things in my head just now. So I think the key to it is not just designing, but within that. So if they pause the game, the players choose to pause the game, or the coach pauses the game.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can get the players to pause the game, please let me know how you've done that, because I've offered that to kids a few times, and as soon as the game started, they have no thought in their head to pause it and to come and get a cheat, a clue, or a challenge, or anything like that. But that's because in education, they've never been challenged to think that way anyway.
Yeah.
They're waiting for the coach or the teacher to say stop.
Yeah.
But when I do pause the game and I bring them in, I think that is still my opportunity to be the coach. So if a team has asked for a clue, well, there's my prime time opportunity to ask a really good question to get them thinking. Or if they want a challenge, think of something that's relevant to the needs of the group, but also the mission that they're trying to achieve. And if your game is really well designed, it can last for ages. Because like a video game, I mean, I remember playing Sonic the Hedgehog, getting on to like level 9, as in not even level 9, it's like the game world number 9. Like it's like never ending, isn't it? It's like, okay, like, and if you ever completed the game, like there's not many people I knew that ever completed video games.
Yeah.
And so for me, a real big difference in video game playing and playing in a coaching session is that it seems that at the end of the session, that's the end of that now. And then next time we'll just come back, and if today was on passing, well, next week we'll probably come back and do maybe a bit more on passing, but not in the same game. And I think we're missing a bit of a trick there with this term of like this idea of mastery and getting players to master the game. Because players might only make a little bit of progress in the game in the first session, but we can save their progress. We can come back to it.
I'm smiling. So tell me more about what you mean by missing a trick around mastery. You've sparked my interest.
We talk a lot, don't we, about being patient as a coach, especially if we're using the game-based approach.
Yeah.
And we talk all the time about long-term player development. But when we design a new session for the players, we're not helping them to make connections necessarily to the successful solutions that they've had in the past and really link them and build on them. And I know on coaching courses, there's a lot, especially with the FA now, there's a lot around building a coaching program. So being able to like link sessions together, linking that to match days and building on that, which is brilliant, which I agree with. But in video games, if you've got a kid it's about feeling. So if you've got a player that feels like the challenge is hard but doable and the effort is paying off, that's not my quote, that's from James G, but I love it. If the challenge is hard but doable and effort is paying off, then they'll want to come back to it anyway. They'll want to come back to that point in the game where it ended. They can try again. And it's about getting them to think on a different level. So not just to understand the tactics, not just, this session is about when to pass, how to build through the thirds with our passing. Like, that's potentially quite a technical skill, tactical practice, learning about principles of the game. But in video game design, it's about understanding the strategy first, not the tactics first.
Yeah. When you say the strategy, what do you mean?
So I always describe it as like at the moment, I'm, as you know, I'm doing my professional doctorate at UCAN. And the concept that we're talking about at the moment is, if you had like a spectrum, I don't know if that's the right word or not, but you would have on this side associated drills would be technical. Then you'd have probably skill development. You'd have like tactical development. Yeah. And for me over here, at the other end of the spectrum is the strategic. So that bird's eye view of what are we trying to achieve? What's the overall goal? And not tactically, but strategically, how are we going to not just solve problems, but set problems? Yeah. For the opponent. So I would describe it as like thinking on a meta level.
Okay.
So setting and solving problems and being able to take pieces of information out the game that I need at the right time. Yeah. So Sonic's fast feet was always the token that I wanted to get when I was playing Sonic. And what it gave me was the ability to run really fast for like 5 seconds, which meant that I could just fly through the ditch with all the lava in, which I could never jump over. So just fly through that. That was what I needed to overcome that problem. Yeah. So that sort of bigger picture, strategic, meta level thinking of the game, as opposed to thinking cognitively about how to solve the tactical problems, and then as opposed to just thinking about how to execute the isolated technique.
Thinking about thinking about the game in that way, yeah, that's interesting. When you talk about it as a strategy, I think when people talk about tactics, I think sometimes they're talking about the strategy of the game. So what you're saying is kind of like fundamentally, what does the game ask you to do in order to achieve it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a footballing context, or most invasion games, in actual fact, it's about getting the ball to a particular point of space.
Yeah.
And, broadly speaking, and defensively, it's stopping the opponents from doing the same.
Yeah, but then if you're using a video game design in your coaching session, then the strategy will always change.
Okay.
Yes, fundamentally, it's going to remain similar because it's an invasion game. But if because of the level ups, the strategy changes. So if I'm on level 4 and you're on level 6, so you've got two players unlocked that I haven't got. In addition to, you've just cheated.
Yeah.
So then you could potentially have one more player in your team than us.
Yeah.
In addition to I've just earned a superpower.
Yeah.
In this game,
yeah.
Which means that any one of us on my team can be unlocked at any moment in time. Well, then there's just so much different situations in the game, not related to the tactical side of playing the game, but factors that will influence the strategy of how we wish to play the game. And then the additional layer on that is because it's a team game. And we know that video games, that complex strategic thought process is usually as an individual, whereas here it's got to be a shared understanding of the strategy. And bearing in mind it's always changing, that becomes really challenging.
So how do you just for people who might be struggling with this a bit, so how do you differentiate between the strategy and the tactics? Because they're quite similar, or some people might think they're quite similar.
Yeah, so I would say that then the tactics is about solving the problems that are associated to the principles of play of your sport. So for me, then it would be in invasion games, creating space, movement, penetration. So any tactical problems that relate to that, where skill is inherent in that as well. We're talking about like, I've got the ball, I'm going to pass it forwards. So I've managed to show some good movement to get on the ball to penetrate the other team. So it's the technical and the tactical stuff, whereas I would say the strategy stuff is a bigger picture of understanding why you're doing what you're doing in order to get to the mission. So not to solve a problem in that moment in time, but to have an overall strategy of where you want your team, where you want them to go and how you want them to achieve the mission. Yeah.
See, I think some people would describe that as tactics, but I actually think the extra layer you've put on there is quite helpful, because it's interesting. I think a lot of us I'm involved in coach development, coach education, and I think it's been, when I design activities, I tend to either implicitly or explicitly work backwards on the layers that you've just described. So what's the strategic objective first and foremost? Within that, what might be some of the tactical elements that we might want to explore, and then you can constrain or provide opportunities for action aligned to those particular tactical elements that you are kind of quite keen to explore. Because there's one of the challenges with this approach is there's so many potential opportunities, and sometimes you do have to constrain, otherwise that you're not getting enough time to have enough exploration within one opportunity for action. And then the next layer down within that might be some of the movements, techniques, if you like, some of the movements that might be associated with the particular tactical element that you're exploring within, related to your strategy. So when you start to layer like that, then your game design is all based around that. So the rules you create help you to explore that world, that level.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in the sense that it's often merged, strategy and tactics, nearly always merged together. I think coaches quite often, though, at the moment.
Amy, bear with me 1 second. I've got to pause because good. Yes, right. Sorry, we're back. Carry on.
So I was just talking about when a coach says to their team, "Okay, go away and talk in your team about how you're going to do X, Y, and Z." That's sort of encouraging them to think strategically, because it's about planning. It's about can you plan how you're going to achieve this?
Yeah.
But in a video game, your plan will always change.
Right.
And that should be the case in football as well. But it's whether we can get our players to think like that in terms of being able to recognise as they're playing that their strategy needs to change.
And they're the combinations that they have to explore, and I don't think we sometimes, because as coaches we don't think like this always. Sometimes I think it's hard for us to help them to get the level of understanding. So, for example, you'd be exploring with them, wouldn't you? And maybe if you were to give a clue, for example, the clue might be related to their strategy. It might be related to the tactics that they're using within their strategy, and it might be related to the techniques that they're deploying within the tactics within their strategy. So it's kind of really multi-layered.
Yeah,
it's very rich.
Yeah, there was. I like the term. Yeah, multi-layered. I think that's where the coaching comes in. So when we say we're questioning whether the game is the teacher or not, I would still say that not completely, because the coach has to be able to support in the right way at the right time upon request of the players. So it is essentially about getting the players to get onto that, or I would say metacognition, which is sort of realising.
Thinking about thinking.
And why. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thinking about how they're thinking. Because as that game evolves, and as loads of different things will change in the game due to its design, they have to be consciously understanding of that, and therefore reflect, adapt in action. And I suppose this is where it's slightly different from the constraints-led approach, where adaptability is obviously a really key part of that. But that would usually be driven by a task or individual constraint applied by the coach to get the players to implicitly adapt.
Yes and no. I was just about to ask you about that, because I can hear the theoretical underpinning of where you're doing your professional doctorate coming through, because it's an ongoing debate about this. Because I was thinking, I don't know if that's necessarily how I see it. I mean, it might well be true in terms of a constraints-led or an ecological approach, but I think the way I see it is, I still think there is cognition. Of course there's cognition. I think the difference is whether we're seeing it from the perspective of the performer gaining information from outside of themselves and then processing that internally in order to then choose an action, or whether we're seeing it from the perspective of the environment. Is their awareness of their changing environment sufficiently attuned for them to be able to make adaptations, whether they're strategic, tactical, or technical adaptations. And I think that's fundamental. In each case, there's cognition. It's just, I think, different in terms of one is a more explicit cognition, like you say, metacognition, thinking about thinking. It involves a discussion or an external impetus, whereas in what I would describe as happening here, and getting a bit theoretical, I suppose, but what I would describe as happening here is, I think, that both things are happening. I think we've just got different words for them.
Quite often the case, isn't it?
Yeah. And sometimes I think it's the limitations of language. Our language don't quite evoke what it is with what is happening. I actually think there are sort of obviously two theoretical positions here that sort of always don't quite match. And I can't say that I'm an expert on both of them, and I'm just sort of giving you the layman's view of it, really. But my take on it is that I actually think often we're talking past each other. And you know what I mean? It's not really an opposition, but do you know what I mean? That I've heard opposition, sort of a more cognitive approach described to me, and I've gone, yeah, no, that's what I mean.
Yeah. I guess from the perspective of the video games approach, which is what I can talk best about, is that it is underpinned by the concept of players being able to understand what the problem is that needs to be solved, to have that in mind, and then be able to, off their own back, without the coach asking or enforcing or shaping or influencing, off the back, being able to adapt in that situation strategically.
Yeah.
So I always bring it back to the term of mission-based learning, because if I choose to change the game, if that's the support that I want, that I've chosen, do I know why we've chosen that, or am I just choosing it for no reason? I have to know why I've done that. And when I decide on exactly what it is I want to change the game, like what it is that will look different, do I know why? So I gave the example on a previous podcast with Liverpool FA with Jack about the boy in the left-hand channel of the pitch that was locked in, and the team who were playing against him get frustrated because this boy had an excellent left foot. So you're just like every time shooting into the bottom corner. So it was only 1v1 in that area of the pitch. So the other team just having the intelligence just to like alter the position of the goal, so it's like facing away from him. So he couldn't quite. He would have to bring the ball onto his right foot to shoot, or he would have to pass. And so it's that conscious understanding of, I've chosen to change the game because I've chosen to change it in this way because, and then being able to carry on playing the game with those changes in place.
Interestingly enough, though, I'm not 100% sure whether they always need to know why. So if, for example, that boy with the left foot changes his behaviour and he can't necessarily overtly and explicitly articulate why, he just does. But he does it because he's attuned and aware to the change to the environment. The same thing's happened, hasn't it? There's a behavioural change taken place.
But I'm more concerned with the opposition.
Sorry, say again?
So in that instance, I would be more concerned with the opposition knowing why.
I see. Okay.
So
right.
The opposition have seen the problem.
Yeah.
And they've set a problem for him, for that boy with the good left foot.
Move the goal.
Yeah. They've done that for a particular reason. Now, if you're going to now look at the boy and how he copes with that, then that there would be a change to their environment which would affect how he uses the ball next time he gets it.
Yeah.
And if he wanted to, if he was consciously thinking about how to solve his problem and he realised he needed help, then he could pause the game and get help if he wanted to. He might not have, on the other end of the spectrum, he might not even have clicked that it's a problem to him.
Yeah. And
he might just naturally just like find a new way of reacting to that, responding in that situation.
Interesting stuff.
But unless it was affecting his, really what you want him to think is regarding the mission.
Yeah.
And can I still overcome this problem to get closer towards that mission?
So you gave me an opportunity for action there, which is to go down a rabbit hole around ecological versus cognitive psychology, which I'm now going to use the sandbox and come back out of, and actually use sandboxing as that's one of the other principles, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I heard you talk about that on Jack, and I want to explore it in more detail. So just explain again to me what sandboxing is.
So essentially, it's about, they use the term risk alleviating. So often you hear coaches explaining to players about how important it is to make mistakes, to take risks on and off the ball. And you might try something new in the game and it might not pay off. And, in football, it's quite obvious, isn't it? Hasn't, or any sport, it hasn't worked on that occasion. And for some players, depending on the environment they're in, that can cause them to be more cautious with how they approach problems, because maybe they're worried about the outcome. In video games, they're designed so that the player understands that mistakes are a part of learning. It's inevitable. Mistakes have to happen so that you can get better. So I used to have this app on my phone called Clumsy Pig, and it's a bit like Flappy Bird.
Yeah.
Flappy Bird got taken away, so I got Clumsy Pig. And the first time I used the game, it was like this pig basically with wings.
Yeah.
And there was he was just flying through the screen, and at the top and at the bottom of the screen in different places was like obstructions in his way.
Yeah.
And as soon as you press play, he's on the screen. If you don't press your finger onto the screen, he'll just drop down. He'll die.
Yeah.
So you have to keep your finger on the screen, and how much pressure you apply to the screen will determine how high up the screen or how low down the screen he goes.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So the first time I played it, he just dropped to the floor, literally just dropped down and died. The second time I played it, I pressed the screen too hard. So it's hit the top of the obstruction at the top of the screen and died.
Yeah.
It's they're designed so that you actually want to fail at the start just to understand what I need to do.
You get the rules, yeah.
Yeah, and the risk alleviating stuff is also to do with the concept of you can save your progress. So I was saying to you before about in a training session, how you can't come back to it. It's the end. It's the end of the game, for example. There's 10 minutes left of the game, and you're winning 1-0. Players tend to be more cautious. I mean, it depends on if you're talking about very, very young children or maybe older players, but they might start to keep the ball more. And I suppose some coaches would say, yeah, but that's game management and that's important for when they're actually competing. But it does change the way you want them to play. So video games, because there isn't a time limit, you can always go back and play.
Yeah.
And your progress is saved. If you're on Sonic, they used to have the bell that you had.
The bell, yeah.
So halfway through the level, I had to make sure I rung the bell, especially on lava level, because I rarely went through that level without losing.
You've got quite an emotional connection with lava level, haven't you?
I spent so long trying to get over that level. But yeah, it's allowing players to take more risks, to fail more, so that they can learn more, just by allowing them to come back to the game and saving their progress in the game.
So, how would you sort of do that in one of your coaching sessions? How would you provide that kind of sandbox opportunity? So
for me, that's the concept of the level ups. So that's the progress. It's really clear. It's objective. It's not, you can't argue with that. You finished today's training session on level 2. But then coming back to it next time.
Do you ever do it where if, for example, something happens in the game, they go back to level 1?
I haven't yet. But again, it's another avenue to go down.
That could be a potential cheat, couldn't it?
Yes.
That the opponents get the opportunity to send the others back to level 1.
This is my thing around cheat.
Horrible, isn't it?
I'm still thinking about. In my opinion, I'm still trying to understand this myself, is whatever the cheat is, or the change or whatever, it needs to be something that's going to help your team understand.
So there's not something that's repressive to the opponent. It's always supportive to you. So it's like a power up.
Well, then that would be something different.
Oh, okay.
Just going back to if the cheat was affecting negative, on purpose to affect another team.
Yeah.
It's not helping you to actually get better at understanding.
Yeah.
It's just making them worse.
Yeah.
And then with regards to the superpowers, key with that is that they're temporary and that they're earned. So, for example, the 4 Cs where we say we pause the game and they can opt to challenge, cheat, clue, or change, that's not earned, that's offered. That's just there whenever they want it anyway. Whereas a superpower, you have to earn that. You have to actively go out and seek that superpower in the game because you've realised that you need it.
Yeah.
And you've understood how it's going to help you.
Yeah.
So as I said about the fast feet, it was the box in Sonic the Hedgehog, the token that you had to jump on top of, but sometimes it was hidden in the tree.
Yeah.
You had to find it and jump on top of it.
Yeah.
So in football coaching, I've done before, we've like just tied up a bib, just chucked it on the pitch somewhere. And I said, like, so if your team have possession of the football,
yeah,
you can pick up superpower. So if I'm locked in the middle zone and I've noticed my team have the ball and the superpower is just there, I'm going to pick it up. So I've earned that because I've actually shown the ability to react to a transition, i.e. my team have just won the ball back,
yeah,
and to pick up the bib in time and before anyone else.
Yeah.
And then from there, how I use the power is up to me. But in this case, I might say the power means that you can go anywhere on the pitch. You're not locked in the middle third. But as soon as your team lose possession,
yeah,
you have to drop the bib. You go back to your middle third and you haven't got the superpower anymore.
Okay.
Or even better, you drop the bib, you haven't got the superpower anymore, and you stay in the third that you drop the bib in.
Yeah. I like it. Or like you say, you know, they can, if for example, they made a certain number of consecutive passes, then they could get it.
But then,
go on.
Does that have too much of a coach's influence with, I'm kind of setting you up with the idea of passing now, when passing might not be right for the mission?
I guess, again, it comes back to, it depends on what the mission is and how you've designed. I know what you're saying. So you're saying the world, they're creating their own game world. Yeah. So they're working out the strategy based on the rules of the game. And so you wouldn't necessarily suggest to somebody that doing a certain number of passes. See, I suppose what I'm thinking about is I'm sort of moving away from the strategic world into a world which it's probably a bit more like the equivalent of the fish tank or the trainer zone.
You're going back into the tactics and the skills.
Well, yeah, maybe more, yeah. So if I was sort of saying, actually, in this context, what we're going to do is we're going to spend a bit of time on the skill of this idea of how we might be able to get the ball, move the ball to each other.
But don't say why. So then it's your instinct to want to help players again that you were talking to me before about. So why would you need to influence that if the mission is to unlock your team?
Yeah. And
the idea is to strategize, to plan a strategy, to replan your strategy, to adapt, to reflect, depending on the game and what's happening in the game. Then if the superpower was, I have to have the 5 passes, then you're suggesting that passing might be a viable solution to achieve the mission or level up when it might not be.
No, it definitely wouldn't be. But it's it's probably the equivalent of a mini game. So, like, you might have a mini game within a game.
Yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily align to, I guess, the philosophy of video games. Because if you think about any game where you've earned a superpower, it's not prescribed. You don't have to earn it by doing these skills.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. You just get the superpower anyway.
You just have to find a way of getting it.
Yeah, yeah.
And whether your way of getting it is running with the ball, whether your way of getting it is diving on the floor, sprinting really fast to grab the bib, or reacting really quickly to when we gain the ball back, then that's what it is. But it's not. It wouldn't put anyone down a particular path with regards to skills, techniques, and tactics.
So then, just as a playing devil's advocate on that, then you've made reference quite a lot through this around being locked in thirds. So isn't that sort of the equivalent in the sense of it's because they're locked in thirds, that's sort of already constrained their game world?
It possibly has, but it's not assigned to a skill.
Yeah, sure, I get that. Yeah.
So I might be locked in the third, and I might be locked 1v1 against you.
Yeah.
In the left-hand channel, if we did vertical thirds. And so that's not suggesting that I should be dribbling more than I should be passing, or passing more than I should be dribbling. It's just the situation that I'm faced with at the start of the game.
Yeah.
Because we talk about when we design level ups, or when video game designers design levels, it should be from simple to complex.
Yes.
So in the invasion game, we know how chaotic it can be.
Yeah.
And so if you've got 10 players playing a 5v5, how do you really simplify that? For me, it's about time and space.
Yeah.
They're the factors that provide tactical complexity or simplification of the game.
Yeah.
So by putting players into channels to start with reduces that complexity.
I see. I get it. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not the only design, but that's the design.
Yeah. I suppose it's interesting, I suppose, because I suppose, does it matter then if how you kind of think of how you think of a game? Does that make a difference? So I suppose in my mind, games, your point about simple to complex. So in my mind, games can be very simple and also enormously complex. And so if I was to, for example, go from, take the strategy away, take the tactics away, take the skills away, and just come straight into a technique, I could still develop a game that would allow the exploration of technique.
Possibly, but then does it align to the mission?
It may or may not, but what I'm saying is that at some point down the line it might. But what I'm saying is that because a game form, I know what you're saying. A game requires a world and a mission and everything else you're going to solve. But if in this case the mission might just be, I'm thinking of Clumsy Pig, because really in Clumsy Pig, what you've got to learn to do is to press the screen with the right amount of pressure.
But for me, that's still I think for me, what makes a game is that definition we said right at the start, a set of problems that need to be solved.
Yeah.
And whilst Clumsy Pig is literally just touching the screen with the right amount of pressure, that's the first most simple problem to solve.
Yes.
And obviously there's more obstructions that get in the way.
Absolutely.
As you go on and the screen moves faster.
Yeah.
I think again goes back to that conversation around when a kid goes to play on the PlayStation, they play the game.
Yeah.
The technical practice would have no meaning unless it's situated within the context of the problems that need to be solved in order to achieve the mission.
100%.
Yeah.
And that's why in a fish tank, where you're exploring the movement that you might require to help you to solve the problem, it's the equivalent of either becoming more skillful with the sword or getting the bigger sword or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Or getting the rapid fire machine gun.
Yeah.
When you go to the fish tank, you're going there because you know that you need the bigger sword or the rapid fire machine gun.
And you're going there because you've realised you need to.
Yes.
Not because the coach has said.
Yes,
And that's
but you're still going there.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I would say is you could create a fish tank, which is a mini game, where you explore the use of the sword or discover, oh, there's a bigger sword here. That's kind of what I'm trying to sort of say. Does that work?
Yeah, I guess. What example would that look like in a sport? So if you had a game of hockey going on and your mission was to unlock players from the pitch, from their zones, then what do you mean by a mini game in the fish tank?
So I guess it requires you to think of the macro game as being about unlocking players. So I've never done that.
No.
Which is one of the reasons I'm quite interested in that as an idea, because it's not. Having said that, I also have players who tend to congregate around the ball quite a bit, so maybe I should do it a bit more. And with your age group, that's probably one of the reasons that you're starting there, I guess, to get them to understand how that they can be in space and move the ball around and unlock each other and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Actually, I've kind of found that I did think that initially, but actually with the very young age group that I coach, I found that locking players in doesn't go down very well with them. they just can't comprehend the fact that, you know what it's like, this is the pitch, stay inside it.
Yeah.
I mean, let alone this is your area, stay inside it.
Yeah.
I found it tends to work better with probably like 9, 10-year-olds as opposed to 6, 7-year-olds myself.
I was wondering that.
Yeah. Kids in areas just don't work.
So in a hockey game, for example, one of the things that we'll do a lot of is a game which, let's say, for example, which involves them. I call it Barcelona. Okay, it's basically a directional. It's almost like a version of rondo, I suppose, but it's a directional rondo. So you're in a relatively small area, and the aim is to try and create connections with your players. And if your opponent wins the ball, they have to transfer the ball to a different area, and then they try and do the same thing. And the faster they do that, the more space they have to be able to do that. And so that's kind of that's almost like a mini game against the bigger mission. The bigger mission would be about, I guess, counter-attacking, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still going back to the concept around in the mission. When you're trying to achieve a mission, your strategy will always change. So I need to be able to understand at the moment.
I'm pre-prescribing the strategy.
Sorry?
Is it what you're saying, that I'm essentially pre-prescribing the strategy?
Yeah, I think if I'm playing in the game and I face a tricky problem that I can't overcome.
Yeah.
Then it's that thought process of the player that we're looking for. Is, have you noticed that you actually have faced this problem, that you actually are finding it difficult to overcome, even though you've tried like 10 times?
Yeah.
And you've tried lots of different ways and it's just not happening.
Yeah.
And have you actually come up with a potential solution to that problem that you think will work, but is it that you just can't execute the technique or the skill?
Mm-hmm.
So it could be dribbling, it could be passing, could be running with the ball, could be combination play, could be anything. But if that's what it is, that stubborn problem, and you think, actually, well, I need to just come away from that and just practice that in isolation, as opposed to it's a mini game, because then for me then there's double emphasis on the strategy and the tactics and stuff, when actually the other game has all of that. I'm just going to come over here if and when I need to practice something. And I'm not saying it necessarily has a lot of benefits. I don't know, because I haven't measured it. I haven't really looked into it. But the whole concept of it is getting players to think. So even if a player has realised and gone over there, I mean, I'd be delighted as a coach, because for me then it shows, wow, like, you're seriously like thinking on a meta level about how to tackle this mission. Mm. And for everyone in that fish tank could be doing something different. Mm. So I might go in the fish tank and be practicing my left foot. Well, you might be in the fish tank and be practicing Cruyff turn.
It's interesting because I'm exploring. The reason I'm sitting here kind of thinking, you can probably even hear my brain going, is because I'm reflecting as we talk about my practice. And I think I'm going to have to think about this in more depth, and we're probably going to have another conversation. But I think what I'm trying to say is, where I'm coming from is because I'm wanting to I'm not always connected to the big mission. So what I'm saying is within the overall context of the big game, there's sort of mini missions. In order to get to the big mission, you've got to complete the mini mission. So I'm thinking about, using Battlefront as an example. I've got to secure Scarif. I've got to secure Scarif, and I've got to get through I've got to break down their whatever it is, their shield, because if I can't do that, then we can't win the whole big mission in the whole big world. So I'm going to explore that bit for a bit to see if we can become better at winning that mission to get back to the bigger mission. Do you see what I'm saying?
I'd say that's within the game anyway. So that's like levels. Yeah. The first part of the game is that you need to secure. What's the person's name that you just said?
Scarif.
Scarif.
Yeah.
Scarif needs to be secured first.
Yeah. And
that might be the most simple problem within the overall game that you start them on with.
Yeah.
But they solve that within the game. And if they realise the skill they need to develop in order to secure Scarif is combination play.
Yeah.
They realise that's actually really important to this, then they'll try to apply that, and if they feel like they need to get better at it, they might go to the fish tank and then come back. And it's about levels, isn't it? So levels, the Scarif might be level 1 in your game, but then the level 2 is something different. But what you need to do with the level ups, I've found, is not to prescribe too much around the tactics. Which is why for me it always comes back to time and space. So another game design that I've used before is a pitch, a goal at each end, and then in the goal is like bibs just resting on the goal net, not tied, they're just like rested in different places on the goal net. And level 1, like the start of the game, we've got 5 bibs and you've got 5 bibs, and when we score a goal, if one of them drops off the net, or 2 of them might drop off the net, then we level up. So if you hit the ball really hard into the net, it doesn't even have to hit the bib, it could just hit the net really hard, then a ripple effect will occur and like a couple of them will drop off the net. So that means we've leveled up to level 2 whilst you've still got your 5 and you're still on level 0. And again, that's not me sort of prescribing anything. The mission is, can you try and score spectacular goals so that all of your bibs come off the net? How they do that is up to them.
So that's the equivalent of Scarif. And by the way, in case I get hate mail from Star Wars fans, Scarif is a first order base. It's in Rogue One. I don't know if you've seen Rogue One. Okay, yeah, so it's a base they have to destroy in order to be able to send. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Send the plans to be able to break up to kill the Death Star. I can just imagine people having a go at me. So, but that's sort of what you've just described. There's almost the equivalent of Scarif, because what's the mission is a kind of. It's not the big mission. It's a lower order mission. The mission is score spectacular goals.
Yeah.
So what you're essentially doing there is goal scoring.
Not necessarily.
Go on then.
Because it's about how do they, first of all, need to get the ball back.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's elements within it. Yes.
Whatever pitch will we win the ball back. And then when we have got the ball back, how are we going to use the ball? So we can't necessarily always have the opportunities in the final third. So we might have to think about how we're going to build from defensive third up to the final third.
Yeah.
And then we might face a situation where the other team are really compact and they're hard to break down. So it becomes more about like progressing and penetrating and trying to find little gaps, like quick combinations.
It just sounds to me though that, and I'm not challenging. I'm just very, very interested. And this is the problem you have with me when I get inquisitive. But how do you then? There's so much information that the players have coming at them. There's so many possibilities.
Yes.
How do you then help them to narrow down the available options to be exploring? Just sort of. So I talk about something called the funnel of variability. So at the very top of the funnel is the whirling chaos of the game, and it happens. It's happening. It's all crazy up there. Down the bottom, it's still pretty intense, but there's less things going on. It's in a much smaller space or smaller context. So if I reduce the variability down in the funnel, then, and by reducing the variability to a certain extent, you can then begin to explore certain elements. So I suggested that your game was about goal scoring because the purpose, the mission, is to get the bibs to fall off the net. And now, I know you're still exploring all the other elements of how you get to that point, but ultimately, the game is asking you to get the ball into the net as hard as possible to get maximum bibs off, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, you're correct, but I think again we need to see it as an interconnected system.
Okay.
So again, James G talks about it, and it's gone out of my head the exact design feature that he calls that, but it's about understanding how one aspect of the game links to the other, and then links to another and links to another. So not just seeing it as a shooting and finishing practice, but it is just a game. It's just a game. Like we have to be able to defend in order to attack anyway. So if, as an example, if I'm playing against your team and we can't get the ball back, then that's what we'll be practicing. So it just depends on how the players interact with the game. It's an ongoing interactive conversation between players and game.
The danger there, though, isn't it, is that the players then never get to attend to an element of gameplay that they will require in order to achieve the full mission.
And that's why the superpowers become vital.
Okay, so throw a superpower into this to help me visualize this.
Okay, so
now my brain's hurting.
So let's use the bib idea again. So bibs on the floor. If your team have the ball,
overload, underload.
Or you could just, if your team have the ball, pick up someone could pick up the bib, and then that person who's holding the bib, if they manage to score a goal, then, and it doesn't actually knock off any of the bibs, but it goes in the back of the net, it still counts as knocking off a bib.
Wow, I see. I get it. Okay.
And then, because I actually happened recently, I delivered this particular game with a group of new players I didn't know, and they were on quite unevenly balanced teams.
Yeah. And
to make it even more unbalanced, one team was scoring into an 11-a-side goal, and the other team was scoring into a 7-a-side goal, just because they were the only goals I had available.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the team scoring in the big goal were having loads of success because not only was the target bigger, but the ripple effect of the net meant that more bibs kept falling. And then when the superpower was introduced, it was vital for the players on the other team to realise, oh wow, we need this. We need to have this superpower. And when we've got it, we need to make sure that the ball gets passed to that boy who's holding that bib so that he can have a chance of scoring a goal, so that we can get a bib down.
So in that context then, when the player has the superpower and has the bib, don't get me wrong, I can see this as being massively engaging. And I can imagine they can explore this. By the way, how are you for time?
I have about 12 minutes left.
Brilliant, okay. So when they're in this game context and they get that superpower, if we assume that the big game of football has a mission, the mission of the big game of football is still the same around getting the ball to the goal and getting the ball in the goal.
Yeah.
stopping the opponent from doing the same thing. Lots of ways of doing that.
Yeah.
Tactically, but principally that's our mission. They haven't got the option to have a boy with a bib.
Mm-hmm.
So how does the boy with the bib help them to get better at the mission?
Because it provides opportunities. The superpowers in training situations provide players the opportunity to still practice skills required of them.
Yes. Okay.
And have a little bit of a shield, I suppose, around.
Yes.
I guess it's a little bit like differentiation, isn't it?
Yes. Got it. So you can essentially give an individual, they can earn or whatever, they can get the ability. See, I would in my world that's a constraint. So I would put some constraints around that individual to enable them to interact with the game in a different way than others. So, for example, one I would use is they can't be tackled.
But why?
So, because I want to differentiate, because they haven't necessarily got the technical ability to be able to manipulate the ball as well as others. Therefore, they have a little bit more freedom. They have a shield.
Yeah. No, I get that bit, but in terms of it's the not being tackled, how does that get earned? I think that's the really important part around video game design is nothing's given to you.
Yeah.
And you have to show a certain level of thinking to understand, hold on a second, does that player even know that they need that constraint as you described it? That's just you enforcing it. So the skill is about, can the player realise they need it in order to be more successful in this game?
Yeah, but that's the coaching bit, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the what we was talking about at the very start of the conversation around the coach having a desire to help and to support and to challenge.
Yeah,
which is important. However, in the video game stuff, that would only occur if and when the players want to pause the game.
So if the players pause the game, what you're basically saying is that you offer them 4 constraint opportunities, which are the 4 C's.
Yeah.
And then they choose them.
Yeah, they choose what they want, how they want it. Ideally, it would be when, but I haven't got to that point with players yet because they've got too much to think about when they're playing the game. They don't think to pause at the moment.
Okay.
But essentially, yeah, the superpower thing that I would describe as superpower because it's earned. They've realised why they need to try and earn it and how to use it effectively to reach the mission.
Yeah.
So as an example, if I'm the boy who's picked up the bib when our team have the ball, I've managed to do that, and all of a sudden our team lose possession. I have to now think about where I'm going to drop it on the pitch. That becomes very important because I need to set the problem for the other team.
Okay.
And even when I have got the bib, it's that challenge around how best can I utilise this because it is temporary.
And do you sometimes find that the players defend the bib more than they defend the goal?
I thought that would be the case, but only a couple of times so far.
Okay.
But again,
it's not a bad thing.
It's the strategy coming in, isn't it?
Yeah, it's an opportunity for exploration again, isn't it? That's interesting. Why did you do that? Yeah.
I think I said it in the Liverpool FA podcast, but I often think about the situation where one of the players just went into the corner of the pitch with their superpower.
Yeah.
And I didn't know whether it was a genius idea or whether it was a silly idea. And even now I'm still thinking about, why did he do that? Like, what was the strategy? What was the thinking behind that decision? But yeah, essentially, I suppose it's stuff that's getting them to think about what they need, when they need it, why they need it, to help them to get to that mission.
Yeah. So this is something that this is far deeper than I thought it was, and I'm not saying that to say that I didn't think it was deep. What I'm saying is it's even deeper than that. And the conversation we've just had has probably, I kind of thought this would happen, which is one of the reasons I was so excited about having this conversation, because I knew that it would kind of ask me some questions, and it's definitely asked me some questions, but it's definitely asked me more questions than I kind of thought I was going to get asked. And there's questions I'm still rattling around in my brain. And I'm going to have to explore this. And I'm probably going to have to get you back on to say, this is what I've done. And then you can tell me where you think I am, because I have definitely been using games in a different way.
Yeah.
And I'm still not sure whether the way I'm using games, the bit I'm struggling with is whether the way I'm using games aligns to kind of my philosophical standpoint and my theoretical underpinning for the way I approach learning and development, the approach I take to coaching, and whether your approach is obviously based from the theoretical standpoint that you've studied and are ongoing studying. And that's the bit that I really want to continue to explore, if you'll be prepared to indulge me.
100%. I thoroughly enjoy having conversations like this with lots of different coaches. I think it's even today you've thrown some potential design ideas that I hadn't necessarily considered, and I think as a coaching community, if we can do that more frequently, then the sky's the limit. Absolutely.
And I think the other element of that is, and I think what's been really interesting is that from a kind of vulnerability perspective, I've been exploring this quite a bit, really, around, coaching ego and all that sort of stuff. And that's also been something that in order to learn, we have to throw away, I think, learn most effectively, we have to throw away our ego. And that's definitely been something that, has happened today as well, because I'm feeling pretty exposed. But I think that's really good, because, I mean, that's a challenging conversation, and you've made me really reflect on my practice. And actually, that's one of the reasons I actually set this up, because I was slightly concerned that the podcast becomes a bit of an echo chamber, and we just basically get people on who think the same and violently agree with each other. And whilst I think, by and large, what we've been saying to each other has been generally in agreement, you've definitely thrown some curveballs my way that have made me really reflect. So I'm very grateful to you for that. The second thing is tomorrow is my final session of the season, and we're going to be doing, we usually do kind of like a bit of a mini festival with all the players, and they're all different age groups. And then we have cakes and Easter eggs and stuff like that afterwards. And I've been thinking about what to do. So tomorrow will be
experimentation,
video game based activities. So I'll report back on how we get on. And but in the meantime, before we do all this, if people want to find out more about your research, I know I'll put a link to. Basically, I'll cheat, right? I'm going to take a cheat, thanks, and I'm going to put a link to Jack's podcast, which has got all the links on it. But in the meantime, if people want to track you down or learn more from you or find out more about what you think and say, because I know you are out there in the worldwide interwebs, how do they get in touch?
So my email address is amy.price@stmarys.ac.uk, and you can also tweet me if you're that way inclined. So Amy Price, capital A, capital P _10.
Brilliant.
There's some. I know you said you were going to put the links out that are on the Liverpool FA podcast with Jack.
Yeah.
There's probably some other much cleverer people out there than me to also go to from video game industry and in sports coaching and PE as well. So James Paul G is the guy that I seem to have referenced quite a lot throughout, which my work is based around. And he's actually not specific to sport and PE, but he looks at video game design and then applies it to education as a whole. And his work is really interesting. The challenge is the translating it back to coaching and teaching in sports. And then the other person or people who also do a little bit around it and have been supporting me with my D-Prof at UCLan is Dave Collins, John Stosowski, and Shane Peel, who all three of them are on Twitter. So probably just have a look at some of their work as well, which all sort of links in.
John and I know each other well. We worked together in golf for a period of time.
Okay.
So I know John. I also know Dave very well. We don't always see eye to eye.
I can imagine.
We have some robust conversations, but as always, I learn a lot from Dave. He's overdue coming on this podcast, not for the want of trying. I'll throw that out there again. And definitely, and Shane as well. So Shane's over in Australia, isn't he?
Yes. So he actually, when I told you at the start of this podcast, where I was Googling stuff and found G's quote around a game is a set of problems that need to be solved. Well, after reading more around that, I actually contacted Shane directly. I don't know him, I didn't know him at the time, but he was very kind to reply to me and talk to me about an article that he'd started to write, or I think it was just about to be published. And the title of that was about, I've forgotten how it goes now. How does video game designers, or how does pedagogy think like a video game designer?
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
That. And I can't quite remember it. And I know we've spoken a lot today about the game as teacher and how that's emerged from video game design. And yeah, if you can read that article, I probably should have researched the exact title of it before I started to talk about it on this podcast, but I'm sure Shane will send it to anyone.
I'm pretty sure I've got it. I'm pretty sure I've got it, and I think it might even be in the members area on my website as a resource.
Cool.
Double check that, but I think it might be there before people all rush there and then are disappointed not to see it. But one way or another, hopefully I'll put it there so people can access it, because it's freely available, isn't it, on the web?
I think so.
Yeah. If not, I'll link to it.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Amy, I'm really, really, really grateful for you giving up your time to come on a podcast. Like I said, I've been really excited about having the conversation. You've definitely given me far more to think about. And I know that the people out there, based on the sort of feedback I get from people about the podcast, will absolutely massively value the time you've taken and the research, and been prepared to share your research in the way you have. And I know lots of people will go away with loads of ideas about different ways of doing this. So I'm very grateful. And all the best, and then hope and needless to say, I'll be back in touch, and hopefully we can do a part 2 in due course.
Good stuff. Good luck tomorrow.
Thank you very much. I'll need it, I think.
Cheers, Stu. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Talent Equation podcast. If you like the show, then please consider supporting it by leaving a review on your favorite podcast player, telling your friends about it, or even becoming a hero and show your appreciation by becoming a patron. Just head over to thetalentequation.co.uk and click on the Becoming a Patron button at the top of the page.
So there you have it. Wow, what a conversation. Amy definitely got me really thinking through that conversation. You could probably hear the cogs whirring, and I came away from it with really felt like I'd given that, some decent cognitive energy, and working through some of the concepts and ideas. Definitely went in a direction that wasn't expected, and that's sometimes what I love about it. So I'm massively in Amy's debt. She's really got me thinking. After the conversation, we had a phone call, funnily enough, while I was watching my children having some tennis lessons, not necessarily using any of these principles, and had a really, really long conversation about another probably hour or so, just going through some of the thoughts and ideas that we'd explored within there. So there's definitely more to come. It was like a 2.5 hour jam session, 2 coaches getting together and getting some good ideas. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. There's loads to take away from that. I almost sort of lost track of all the different things, but just some fascinating ideas around the use of games and video games and making them compelling. And I watch my young children at the moment, particularly my little boy playing video games and interacting with his friends online, and it's fascinating some of the strategies they come up with, and I can really see some of that stuff in action. So Anyway, I'm hoping you're all going to go away, take some of those ideas on board and apply them into your games and make your sessions as compelling as video games. I think it's the challenge for all of us. If we're going to compete with the interaction that young people have in a video game in a virtual space, and we can try and bring something like that into the real world, then we I think could be really onto something. So some fascinating ideas there. In the meantime, I want to say a big thank you to Vinny Halsall, who a good friend of mine. I coached him on a Friday night cricket, who decided to sort of come on board as a Patreon supporter. He could have just bought me a drink after each session on a Friday, but hey, whichever way it works for you, Vin, really appreciate that. And for anybody else out there, if you want to get on board, do what Radio J says. You know, he's quite serious about it. So if you want to jump on board and support the podcast, your support would be much appreciated. In the meantime, I hope your coaching goes well, and I'll see you next week.